we're going to talk about traditional cut roofs, which you probably know what I'm talking about, insulation, truss rafters, a summary and some questions. So let's talk about traditional cut roofs. Here is one which I made earlier, and you can see, I'm sure you're all, anyone not familiar with this? No, that's good. That makes life easier. You have got basically the rafters, you've got the ridge board, the purlin, and you've got the wall plate. Now, the point about this sort of roof, here's my little scale model. I love models. Demonstrate. This is where it all goes wrong. Right, here is my demonstration. There is a cut roof section. And as you can see, it is perfectly stable. It will stay there for as long as I hold it. And the same will apply to the roof. Now remember that, because I'm going to show you something later on which is rather different. So when you actually look inside a cut roof, what do you find? This is pretty typical. You've got here the rafters, the purlins, and here's a strut coming down to, hopefully, a load-bearing wall, but it's not always the case. And then tied across to the other side. And that, as you saw from my little model, is lovely and stable. You might also find this. Now, this again is a domestic house built probably in the 70s, I think. And here we have got frames. These are frames, one here, that's the other side of them. They're about 1.8 metre centres, and then you've got purlins which actually link up with them and a ridge board. The point about these frames is they're particularly well built, because if you get to the top, there is a lovely bolted connection. And for those of you who were here and saw my presentation on structural fixings, you will know that we should use hexagon bolts and not the other sort, which I will now show you. These, bane of my life. You see these, this is a coach bolt. And as you can see, first of all, it's not a structural bolt. Secondly, it's only got a minimal head. It's got a square shank which doesn't fit a round hole in the washer. And you will see these, as you go around and do your inspections, you see those and they are not structural and we need to do something about them.
So can I just ask one question?
You can.
I've seen a lot of old information that they recommend using coach bolts, which seems really, really unusual.
Obviously done by someone who's not competent.
Yeah, sort of in old books, people that supposedly know what they're talking about, but talking about 30 years ago, 40 years ago,
yeah.
Going back, but they seem to say the coach bolts was the recommendation.
Because of the name, it's a coach bolt. So what do you do with a coach bolt? You build a coach, and then you have some horses, and then off you go. It's not for buildings. Right, here is another one. This is really good. I took this, again, you've got a really nice big purlin. Purlins are not always big. Sometimes in Imperial, because they're old, you might find a 6x3. It's much better if you can find a 9x3. But again, people are not necessarily competent. As one of the speakers said this morning, cheapness. You know, why buy a 9x3 when you can get a 6x3 and no one's going to notice? Well, we do notice. So in that sort of situation, but that is far too long for a single purlin. So you will need to have more than one piece of timber. And where you have one more piece of timber, you need to join them. This is a typical joint. Here is the strut, and here's the purlin coming in from both sides. Really, although it's frequently not done, it's better to have the joint away from the strut, all right? Because here, this purlin is only bearing by less than about 20-25 mil actually onto the strut. The other side is where we get the problems here. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. That's the other way around. That's the one that comes in on there, and that's the one you get the problems on. And I will now demonstrate this with my little demonstration. Right, if you can imagine This piece of timber here is the strut. This is the one coming in here, which you can see from coming in from the left-hand side. And the weakness here really is across here. Now, in theory, that will shear. In reality, I have never seen one in all the years I've been doing it. What we do have is the opposite problem. And this is the one on the right here. So this is the one on the right, and it's coming in. In fact, I will turn that round because it makes it life easier for me. Right, so this is the one coming in on the bottom. This is the one coming in on the other side, which sits on there. Well, it should sit on there. What actually happens, once it's loaded, it cracks like that. And that is not good. That is not good at all. That results in the purlin actually deflecting, and I have seen ones where this crack there has been as much as 75 millimeters. To put it right is quite an interesting one. But I think that demonstrates that this side, you very rarely, I've never seen a problem. That side is completely different. You also get the problem of cracks. And as you can see in this one here, this is already developing a crack. It's on the weak side as well. So that, if you were looking at an inspection and report, that's the sort of thing that I would flag up as a matter of concern. This is a nice big house, really big. On the back slope of this roof, the purlin had gone in the way I've just demonstrated. And it had dropped by about 2 inches, about 50 mil. And there was this big dip in the roof. And we actually put that back. We used the technique of differential incremental jacking, which I developed in the 1970s, used in lots of different projects. We actually put it back, and then we strengthened the joint so that it's fine, and it's been fine ever since. But it's not just little domestic houses, you can get it in big houses as well. Another problem is re-roofing. Originally, there are literally tens of thousands of houses which have slates, mostly built in the Victorian era, Welsh slate in particular, being replaced with concrete tiles. Here's a good example of half done. We've got the original slates and we've got the concrete tiles on the other side, which is the next door property. Concrete tiles weigh several times as much as slates. And this is a problem, because these people who do the re-roofing, it's a Fred Blogg's re-roofing company. Yes, they're not structural engineers. They are supposed to check the roof. They are supposed to strengthen the roof where it is necessary, which is usually the case. And they don't do it. All they want to do is take the old ones off, put the new ones on and go away. We get a number of problems from this. This is another one which has been done. Can you see the bend there in the hip? That's really, really deformed. Just because they've changed the tiles but they haven't strengthened the roof. And we have to be very careful with builders. This is another one where they're taking the roof off, but when they put it back, they're actually putting 3 Velux type windows in here. Now, what usually happens is that they just ignore it and they just carry on, put the windows in, and that's it. This I was quite impressed with because the builder's actually doing it properly. He's actually doubled up the joists, the rafters on that side and this side, all the way along. So I took that because I was quite impressed. It's nice to see someone doing something right for a change. But it doesn't always happen. Here we have someone who wanted to put their 3 roof windows in. Look at the deflection on that roof. Look, and there's one, even that one there, which hasn't got the windows in. But of course, they've changed the tiles. So what was a very thin slate with quite a low weight is now concrete tiles with a much greater weight. And that is a big problem. you'll probably see this when you go around doing things, but if you see that, it's a sure sign that the roofer didn't do the job properly. Right, enough about that. Let's talk about insulation. We need to improve our properties. So, originally, of course, certainly when I started my career, there was no requirement for insulation at loft floor level. Then it was 1 inch. Oh, gosh. Then it was 2 inches. Then it was 4 inches. And it's getting serious now because most of the ceiling joists are 4x2s or 50 by 100s. So we've now got right up to ceiling joist level. And now it's around 250 millimetres. So that bottom bit is completely buried. And a word about sprayed insulation. Again, something else you will see if you go and look in a domestic roof. Something like this, which is, this is where insulation has been taken out. But in fact, once they spray it in, it looks like this. And of course, this is what causes the problem. Roofs need to breathe, just like you and I breathe. And this doesn't. And it was only a few years ago, I went to a meeting, and it wasn't my client, but there was a very distraught client there, and it was really serious because he was a publican. And it doesn't get more serious than having problems in your pub. A few years beforehand, the owners of the pub, the brewery, had been persuaded to have it sprayed like this. And of course, the moisture content went up, and all the rafters rotted, and the whole roof had to come off and be redone. And the pub was closed once it was done. So, serious loss of drinking time there.
Just one question, what's the timescale between the spray foam insulation and the timbers rotting in your example?
In that example, just a few years. I haven't got a precise number, but it was only a few years before before they came back to do a routine inspection, and suddenly found all these rafters were rotting. So it wouldn't take very long. The essence of that, sorry.
Got a question. What about open cell spray foam insulation?
Well, the manufacturers will say open cell spray foam is fine. We'll have to wait and see. I'm not convinced. But it's very interesting because this has spawned a new part of our construction industry. Spray foam removal specialists. And I picked this one up from a magazine. I have no connection with this firm at all in any way, shape or form. I just happened to notice it in a magazine and thought, now this is interesting because we know that the closed cell spray foam was a problem, and now we have firms who are actually here advertising its removal. However, it gets more interesting because the lawyers are now jumping on this as well. So this is again one I saw in the magazine. I have no connection with them at all, but it's interesting that the lawyers are now looking for no-win, no-fee cases against the spray foam people. I'm not sure whether they'll get it far because I have a feeling that the spray foam companies will disappear overnight. But it's interesting how our profession goes from, oh, we'll do something, here's a good idea, no, it's not a good idea, now we've got to take it out, and now the lawyers are involved. And it seems to be spreading. This is another one I saw. Again, I have no connection, but they specifically mention spray foams. So interesting stuff. Right, I think that's enough about conventional roofs. We will move on to the next bit. Truss rafters. The history of those. They were sheathed with plywood in North America when they actually started. They were developed in North America and they've used very successfully in North America. But they left the sheathing out when they moved to England. That was our beloved government. So the roof started failing within a few years. They then decided that the gable walls should support the roof. Initially, the thought was, and the regulations said, that the roof would support the gables, but they found that didn't work, so they changed the rules around. We had failures of gable walls, and they decided that the roof had to support itself and the gable walls. More bracing was required, big problems with poor quality workmanship, and a lack of on-site checking. So in North America, their buildings, their homes, are usually formed with timber stud-work. They're 4x2 because America's still imperial, 100 by 50s in our language. And the walls of the roof are covered with structural grade plywood. Now that's really important because they're using 12mm structural plywood. So the roof is essentially a folded plate. And if any of you know structural knowledge, you know that a folded plate is incredibly strong. And it's very stable. This one is interesting. I've put this one in. I'm going to tell you a little story. This is in New England, in Connecticut. And this is typical of the American construction. So you've got the stud works here, and this is the sheathing plywood, and so it goes up the walls and right across and down again. About 3 weeks before I went to visit America, where I took this photo, they were building another house. This is a concrete basement, and this house was about half the size of the one I'm showing you on the picture. So they built the basement, put the wall plates on with the bolts, built the rest of it like that. Oh, that looks good. And then the storm came. And what happened in this storm? It picked up the house, and it literally rolled it over like that. And it rolled it over 3.5 times into the next field. And when they came back after the storm had gone, oh dear, look what's happened to our house. So they got a crane, and they picked it up, and they gradually moved it back again to the concrete basement. And when they put it back on the concrete basement, it actually fitted over the bolts. Now that tells us a great deal about the strength of cladding things with plywood. But we didn't ignore it altogether. In Scotland, they were a bit wiser than us. Their trusses were covered with structural plywood. Cross-battened, they had a breathable membrane, counter-battens, tiny battens, and roof tiles. So this is in Scotland, as you can probably see from the mountain behind it. Here's the trusses. And here we have the sheathing ply and the sheathing, and then the counter battens, and they're ready for the rest of the battens. So in Scotland, the practice is completely different from what we do in England and Wales.
Would you adopt that for England?
Sorry?
Would you adopt that for England and Wales? Or would you say that's overkill?
Certainly not overkill. You wait and see the rest of the pictures.
Okay.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
We decided, our beloved government, have no structural plywood. Instead, oh, we'll put some diagonal bracing in, and some longitudinal bracing, and maybe some strut bracing as well. There is a fundamental problem. Now, I go back to my little one. Do you remember I showed you this one? This is the cut roof, which is inherently stable. Really nice. This is a scale model, an accurate scale model of a typical roof truss that we use in this country. Is it flexible? Yes, very flexible. But it has a more serious problem, because with these trusses, you have at each end the wall plate. That looks fine, doesn't it? Only because I'm holding it, because it's structurally unstable. And that's what happens. It will move in any possible direction that it possibly can do. So it might start like that, but it doesn't want to stay there. And it just goes jump, like that. And that's a real problem, a very real problem. Here's one which I made earlier. And you can see they put the trusses up, and they put in some diagonal bracing here. They've put in some longitudinal bracing, although that's a bit low down anyway. It should be higher up. And that's pretty typical of the sort of thing that you will see on a large construction site. So what they should be doing, of course, is this. I'll take a minute. Do store on site carefully. I don't think so. Do handle with care. Yes, right. Do fix it right. Now this is again is a problem. This timber is normally 35mm thick. It can be even less. And what they should be using, of course, are these, which strangely enough are called truss clips. There's a surprise. I think there's a clue in the name, but not putting in big nails like they have done there. Do support the water tank. Our standard water tank of 50 gallons, that's 500 pounds of weight in one spot. Don't cut them. That's again another thing. They are precision engineered components. They're designed to stay that way. And do support the water tank. I think he's a bit worried, that man. So what actually happens on site? Well, this of course is what happens. They don't store them properly. They leave them outside. It rains, the timber gets wet. It moves all over the place. Here's another one. Good RW building. Again, just stored outside and lent up against the container. This is recent, this is only last year. Not far from where I live. You can see the trusses are just literally just put down and dumped. And if you look at those trusses from the other side, oh dear. This one is bending to the right. This one doesn't quite know what to do, and these are all bending as well, and then those are the other way around. Really, they were like that for several months, during which time, of course, they got soaking wet, because we've had a lot of rain recently. And of course, the timber moves all over the place. This is what they should do. And of course, has anyone seen that on a building site? No. No. The guidance is all there, the instructions are all there, and they just get ignored. So again, ensure the battens are fixed to each truss prior to release the binding tapes. No, they just come along, hammer those off, and all the trusses go like that. You can lay them flat with bearers across, but again, you'd be very unlikely to see that on site. This is what you'll see instead. It's just dumped on the ground, dumped up here, all over the place. There's no respect, there's no consideration for these things and the way they should be treated. Again, this is another one, just thrown around completely. And again, just dumped on the ground. These are particularly important because of the raised tie there. So they're actually under considerable stress, because you can see from the size of the timbers at the top. But just dumped on the ground. And sometimes, this is a timber frame house. Look at this one. And even the top ones are badly bowed. And this is before they're even put up. So what chance do they stand once they're actually up there? This one, I'm sorry it's a little bit blurred. That was as close as I could get. But I was so amazed. That's probably the worst example I've seen of a bowed truss before it's even been erected. You can see there's a massive amount of curvature in that before they've even been put up. And it causes no end of problems. This is a nice little block of flats. When it was being built, the roof trusses go in here. They were put in there during the week. The builder went home on the Friday night. And Friday, there was a little bit of wind. And this whole lot went over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, pushed all the gable walls over and ended up in the space between this house and that one. The whole lot just went domino, like that. The builder comes in Monday morning, oh dear. He didn't quite say oh dear, he said something not worse than that. Because he had to then take it all out, put it up and do it all again. A real problem. It should never happen. But we do have problems with them when they're up. And you get twists in the rafter. And again, this is because of them being outside in the rain and not properly stored. So this is the top. So this is which one is it? It's that one. Coming up here to here. And you can see there how much that top cord has twisted. Literally because of bad handling. Similarly with a strut. The strut is this one through here. And again, you can see how much that's moved out of alignment with the plate. Now this is a serious problem. And it's a problem because this is one of the plates. This is a typical plate that's used in the manufacture of trusses. If you look at the little fingers here, they are not much more than 10 millimeters in height. Now, by the time you get to here, and you find that's moved out about 5 millimeters, so the fingers in here are only holding by 5 mil, if you're lucky. Also, if you look at the metal, it's very thin. So by the time you move the timber away from this back plate, you've got a lot of gap there, and these fingers will just bend. They are designed to work in shear, and they're designed to be in close contact with the timber. But this is typical of the sort of problems you get when the trusses are mistreated.
Chris, in terms of remedying that, is it a case of clamping them together and renailing it back on? What's the remedy? Taking the truss out is an option.
No. There is a remedy. It is very unlikely to be done because people don't really take much notice of such things. But yeah, in that particular case you could do. But doing remedial works to those trusses is quite exacting and quite expensive as well for the time and the care that you have to take so that it becomes better and you haven't made the problem any worse than it was in the first place.
Can I make a point, please?
You can.
I was engaged to do a survey of a loft and they wanted it within 3 millimeters. So I spent ages in a loft measuring and it was then decided that the builders would take the complete roof off and redo it, and they would bear the cost. But it was a lot of effort on my part to get to that accuracy.
Yes.
But you could actually see quite easily the distortion.
Mm.
Yeah. So that was the remedy.
Yeah.
Take it off, do it again.
That is extremely unusual to have one taken off and be done again.
The client was a barrister.
Oh, well, that's, yes, jolly good. What would we do without barristers, eh? So anyway, the truss rafters are structurally engineered components, and it says in all the guidance they must be treated with care and in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions, which, as you can see, doesn't happen. The bracing can be difficult to fix, but it's particularly crucial to the design and the construction of the roof. The bracing is designed to go in a certain place. If it's away from that place, then it's not doing the same job. And the architect or building designer is responsible for ensuring that the bracing is installed and fixed correctly. I have never seen a building designer on site checking that the bracing is correct. The contractors really don't want to know. Tile displacement of course is a result, and here is a very nice house in the Midlands. You can see that the line of the tiles here curves to the right, and it's a very, very posh house. That's a bit closer, but you can see how the trusses have moved and the whole lot is going. So bowed rafters are a real problem. And here's one I looked at, and you mentioned about bowed rafters and 3 millimeters. That's about 30 millimetres out of line. And it's very easy to check with the string line, but the whole lot is going. And I showed you the big block of flats earlier on, and that was one of the contributory causes to the whole lot going over. And this is another one. The whole roof is like this. The only thing that varied was the degree of bow from one truss to the next. I think some had probably been on the outside of the pack and got wetter than some other ones on the inside of the pack. But we're supposed to have bracing in there, and of course sometimes it is missing. They don't bother to put it in. This is bracing coming through here, and as you can see it goes down as far as the gable wall at the end, and then it stops. It doesn't come back through the rest of the building at all. The other problem we have is trusses leaning. And here you can see the bottom. This is our piece of timber we use to check, and that truss is from there to there leaning, which is about 20, 30, 40, 50, 65, 70 millimetres in a height of about that much. So that is an enormous amount of lean, and once they start to lean, then there's every chance that they will carry on leaning. Once they start to lean, of course, they crack the gable wall. And here's something else to look for, the crack. You can see here, all the way through there, and it goes down the back. You have to look carefully sometimes to see them, but that truss is actually pushing that out completely. And sometimes it's at the bottom. Again, you have difficulty seeing it, but there's a large crack all the way along here, and then it goes up here, and this lot is all moving outwards as a result of the trusses leaning. Badly fixed bracing. Yes, we're supposed to put bracing in, but it's a good idea if it's fixed properly. This is loft floor level bracing, and this is the sort of workmanship you get. It's really doing no good at all. This and that one should lap by at least 2 trusses instead of just butting them up, skew nailing them, and as you can see this one isn't even in contact with the bottom chord of the truss. And here's another example, a nice piece of bracing going out to the wall, but only comes past one and then it stops. Look, this is just broken timber. And this is the sort of thing which you can find when you go an inspection on a domestic roof. I see you've seen some already. So, incorrectly positioned bracing is a problem, and I mentioned about that. It should be at the node, so this piece here should be tight up in this corner. Not only that, but they've nailed it with a rather large nail, and of course it's split that bottom chord completely. Again, a good example of how not to do it. Sometimes the nail plates themselves, these aren't very big, as you can see, and sometimes they're not even in the right position. So here you can see one, this is the rafter or the top chord, this is the ceiling chord, and here you can see all the fingers. The nail plate isn't even fully embedded in the joint, but it's required to be fully embedded in order to carry the design loads, because these things come in lots of different sizes and they only use the minimum size according to the calculations to take the force from one member to another. So when they're actually not embedded like that, then it's clearly not carrying the force. Again, mispositioning. You can see this one looks pretty good. This one was just popped in anywhere, maybe on a Friday afternoon, because it's on the skew. It's not where it should be. And again, if you look at these two, this one is there, but it's much bigger gap this side. So this one is not being held by the fingers to the extent that it should be. And if you look at the one down there, that's like that, but it tends to be the other way around. This one's okay, but that one's a bit short. Not very good at all. As I mentioned, the nail plates need to be fully embedded. And here you can see, this is a top chord to a ceiling chord joint. You can actually see the fingers there because they're not fully embedded in the top chord. And as I said earlier when I showed you this, those fingers are only about 10 mil long. So time you take 2 or 3 mil out, and they're very, very thin, and they'll start to bend, and they certainly won't transmit the load from one end to the other. And here's another one. This is at ceiling level. Again, you can see 1, 2 there, and this is very important. This is you know, needs to be properly fixed, and the plate is misaligned. You can see from there to there on the right hand side, but only from there to there on the left hand side. So you've got about twice as much fixing this side as you have that side, and it's obviously it's intended to be equal, and it's intended to have the plates pushed in properly to the full extent. And then you get slippage. Here is a case, and you can see, can you see the shadow lines underneath here? Now those shadow lines are the result of the fact that the nail plate is not fully embedded into the timber. And because of that, and because of the very small cross-section of the fingers, this has pulled away. And you can see there's a big gap all the way down here. That should be in contact with those 2 bits of timber. But they're way, way out. Probably 6, 7, 8 mil gap there as a result of that not being fully embedded. Even if they are fully embedded, of course, because they leave them out on site for ages, you get corrosion of the nail plates. And here you can see one quietly rusting away. Now, bearing in mind that the metal is very thin, the time it's rusting away, there's not very much left at all. And this is that one, and that one. In fact, the whole roof was like that because they'd been left outside for far too long. Also notice here, this is a battened fixing nail come through and split. Again, not so good. Now, my favourite subject, water tanks. I have seen some horrendous things in water tanks. They're supposed to have a proper base, which I'll show you in a minute. But in fact, just a couple of bits. This is chipboard, 18mm chipboard, and the deflection there is about 45 millimeters. So the whole tank is twisted like that as a result. Not uncommon to find the tanks improperly supported. Also, of course, the whole load is on 2 trusses where it should be spread evenly over more because of the weight. And it should look like this. So you should have bearers here over 4 trusses, then the cross bearers and all cross bearers, and then a secure base. This comes straight out of the manual for how to do roof trusses, but it's certainly not what you'll see on site. The problem with having on 2 trusses is that these bottom cords here are not designed to take that sort of weight. So those cords are going down under the weight, and you can see here that this truss and the one next to it have gone down by around about 30-35 millimeters as a result of the base not being as it should be. Sometimes they don't even get that far. Now you see burnt trusses, you think, oh, they've been cutting them up and using them for firewood. No, they've been burning them and then putting them up in the building. Now these were in a loft. These were quite clearly subject to burning before they were ever erected. And this is what happens on site. And that certainly doesn't do the strength of the timbers any good at all. You also find problems with the wall plates. And here is a good example. The wall plates, as I showed earlier, come in sections. If you're lucky, they half-lap them like they did in this case, but then they put the roof truss straight onto the half-lap joint and crushed it completely, with the result that the bottom cord here has gone down by about 25 millimetres. And that, of course, then imposes more load on the trusses either side. So again, crushed wall plate is a problem. Even if you get it up and finished, people move in. When they move in, it's my house, I'm going to do this and this and this. Unauthorised alterations. Yeah. I went to look at a house which was a 1970s house, quite a nice house really. Had roof trusses just like this. And the owner of the house wanted to have more room for his extra child. So he decided to create a bedroom in the roof for his first child. But these things were getting in the way. So, that's all right. I'll cut that off there, cut it off there, cut it off there, and cut it off there. I've got a nice space here then. I can make a nice room for my child's bedroom. Yes. Holes through the timbers, timbers removed. Here's a case. This is for television aerials. They've drilled a really big hole through one of the ties and also through the top cord there for the cable. I am not surprised by the number of roofs I've looked at where people have cut out the intermediate members. It is probably more common than we would like, and certainly a thing not to do. There was a case of, this is a 4-bedroom house, and next to it here is a double garage which has a pitch roof like that. Now, the pitch roof, of course, is quite tall because it's a double garage. That's quite big. Owner thinks, I can make that into another room. So he knocks through the gable wall at the end over the weekend so he can get into this roof. That's good. Next thing, cuts out all the diagonals. Monday morning, we get a desperate phone call that the roof is collapsing. Well, there's a surprise. We go down to site, and yes, the whole thing was just like that. Those diagonals are there for a reason, but people do the strangest things when it comes to doing things to their own houses. So, I know you all do inspections, so if you're on traditional roofs, there are things to look out for. Change of roof covering, very common, particularly in the old Victorian houses. Deflection across the roof as a result of that. Check the purlin size, check the purlin bearing. Remember my little diagram here, the ones that bear like that go like that, which is not good. And watch out for the coach bolt fixings, a sign of poor workmanship. For the trusses, look, see if they're not damaged. I mean, a lot of them end up being damaged when they're installed. No lean, no bow, no alterations, holes or timbers removed. Fixed with truss clips. These things are really brilliant, very useful. Nail plates, correctly positioned. They're usually square on the timber. So if you see them at funny sorts of angles, that may not be where they were intended to be. Check the fingers are fully embedded. That's quite easy, not corroded. On the gable walls, look for lean and cracks. Are they tied into the roof structure? There are requirements for the straps that go across the trusses and then down into the cavity of the gable wall. Low bearing walls, are the trusses bearing correctly on the wall plates? Look out for water tanks. Are they correctly sited? Probably not. Proper base and support system. Look out for the bracing, the longitudinal bracing, the diagonal bracing. There will be chevron bracing in there as well, which is onto these ones. Some of the trusses have one that goes up there, and that's the one that goes up there instead of this one. Is the one where you very often find the chevron bracing, or not, as the case may be. and special bracing for unusual designs of roof. There aren't many of those because most of the domestic roofs are all done to the same sort of design. And look for laps and fixing nails and tiling battens. So that is a run through of what you might look for when you're actually doing an inspection. You probably know quite a bit of that. If it's something you didn't know, that's good. If it's a reminder, that's also good. But if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes, sir.
You know the pagoda effect? The pagoda effect? Have you heard of that before?
No.
Where the ends of the pitch roof will go up like the Chinese style roof?
Right, I haven't heard of that one before, but I mean, I'm sure I might know it by another name.
I think that's to do with wall type erosion. If the wall
Is that what it is?
cumulative expansion and all getting concealed the ends up. I don't think that's a good classification.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, I know it, yes.
To the extent we find any of these defects, whether they're small, relatively small or cumulatively large, I mean, is the simple answer we just call in a structural engineer?
Yes.
Well,
The other side of that is, I mean, we as structural engineers will go and look at it and see what we find. I have to say, I've done reports on these sorts of roofs. I have yet to find one of them which has actually been repaired. So there is a good reason for that, because they're mostly owned by the homeowner. They either can't afford, don't want the expense, don't want the disruption, because doing some of those things, like for example the water tanks, you need the plumber to take the tank out and and do it, and you might need to even replace the tank with a new one. So you're not talking about sort of very small sums of money. You're talking about quite reasonable sums of money. The other thing we have to bear in mind particularly is when you do it. So you're not going to do it in midsummer. You probably don't want to do it in midwinter. So spring and autumn, yeah, but it is like many other things that we find defects there, we put them in our report, report goes to our client, nothing happens. And that's the way of things. But at least we've covered ourselves because we've actually found the defects and we've actually documented them and made people aware of them. Having said that, the ones down at ceiling level are becoming more and more difficult because of the greater thickness of insulation. You can't see the bottom plates, 1, 2, 3, 4, because they're buried in the insulation.
And the cross-laid upgrading insulation as well.
Yes, yeah. If you're fortunate and you've got the right thing, you can just sort of pull it back a bit and just have a look at 1 or 2, because it's quite likely they'll be all the same. It's not always the case, but if one is rusty, the rest will probably be rusty, But things like the nail plates not fully embedded are something which you can find anywhere, and without looking at every single one, you wouldn't find them. But you can raise a concern that if the rest of the structure is not very well built, then that may not be very well done either. Because that's the way things are. But these things are so flexible. I mean, this would just bend, and it will go anywhere it wants to, except where you want it to. Right. Are we all done now?
Use the expression right at the beginning, differential incremental jacking.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Right.
What is different to jacking?
Right. If you've got a long purlin, one end has dropped, okay? You don't really want to stick a jack under there and try and raise it. We need to put the roof back very, very carefully. So if this end, I'll just use a hypothetical example, all right? If that end's dropped 100 mil, this will have dropped 75, that will have dropped 50, this will have dropped 25. So when we're jacking it back up again, the one at the end here will go 1, 2, 3 turns, 2 turns, 1 turn, no turns. In fact, we only do part turns, but that's the principle, is that the jacking will be differential and incremental. differential because the jacks move different amounts with each increment. Does that explain it? Yes, but it's not just putting a jack up and lifting it.
Put more words in, not getting paid a bit more.
Yes, it needs to be done with a lot more care because you've got quite a bit of weight up there with all the roof tiles and that, and you've also got a structure which is technically failed because the purlin has split and dropped. So
I've only ever done it where we've unloaded the roof first.
yeah, no, we don't unload the roof. We actually do it with the roof in situ because it's just not necessary to usually. I've never ever had taken a roof off to do it. I've done quite a few, particularly in loft conversions.
The question when you get roof spreads on a gable.
Yes.
So could you just talk through just roughly kind of feel necessary to do? Because I see it sometimes on a gable end, where for example there's the window on the first floor, and I've got a crack in. So now I've got a situation where I've got some cracked brickwork, I've got a bit of roof spreads, where they've kind of messed around with the roof and kind of made an awful lot of works. But it's kind of literally kind of. I ask for a structural engineer, but sometimes I feel like I'm giving a bit of over. I mean, you're going to need a structural engineer bottom line to do roof alterations, but
Yeah.
it's like kind of.
Well, the thing about if you've got an ordinary roof like that and it's spreading, all right, the first thing, it was in its original position. Now it's moved. It's not going to stop moving. All right? It's not going to suddenly say, oh, look, I've moved that much. I'm not going to move any more. It's going to get progressively worse until it collapses. So the sooner you can take some action, the better. And what we would do with that normally in most buildings is actually put the temporary ties in and pull it back together again and then fix it. And then, if necessary, rebuild the brickwork, because sometimes the brickwork...
When you say tyres, what do you mean by the tyres? How would you kind of try to understand how you kind of keep it in situ,
Yeah.
take it apart,
Yeah.
and get that? How would you kind of... That's what...
No, you fix the... You've got... It depends on the roof, all right? There's no one size fits all. But what you really do is you've got an end plate which is bolted to near the foot of the rafters, okay? Just above ceiling level, basically. And then you've got ties, which are normally steel rods that come through here. You've then got a, the thing with the opposite threads on, which you actually can turnbuckle, you've got it. You put the big turnbuckle there, and you can very slowly bring it back. It's not a job where you go in and do it in the morning. It's not that sort of work. But you can actually gradually bring it back again. And you can do that with experience because you know how much to turn the turnbuckle or not, as the case may be. There comes a point where, you know, hang on, that's not a good idea to turn it anymore today. Let's just let the roof go back a bit and then we can turn it a bit more. But yeah, that's perfectly feasible, and it will bring it back again. If you've got something, particularly old buildings, if you've got a listed building, then you know it becomes really important to put it back rather than doing any other work because of getting listed building consent for it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right.